afternoon and good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to an exciting educational webinar today offered by the National Association of Peer Supporters in collaboration with the Center on Integrated Healthcare and Self-Directed Recovery at the University of Illinois in Chicago, as well as with Live and Learn. Today's webinar is titled, What Comes Next? Experiences of Recently Certified Peer Specialists. And the webinar today will be presented by Leisha Ostro and Morgan Pilot. They will introduce themselves in a minute in more detail once we actually begin the presentation. But in the meantime, I want to let you all know that my name is Amy Detmer and I will be the moderator today. I am a N.A.P.S board member and I've been a peer specialist for about 10 years. I currently reside in Vermont, and today I hope this webinar provides me with more information on the trajectory of many who pursue a career in peer support. For the purposes of accessibility, I am on video and I will share my description for those of you the video. White and my background is one of my favorite lake mountain views in Vermont, where I currently reside. Today, I'll be here to answer and technically go about the presentation today. While I go over the next few slides, I invite you all to go ahead and follow this slide to share your name, where you're located, and what do you hope to get out of the webinar today. In the meantime, I also ask you to mute and turn off your video if you are here with us. So we can go to the next slide. N.A.P.S is a membership association for the peer support profession, and our members include peer specialists, supervisors, and allies. And our mission is to grow the peer support profession by promoting the inclusion of peer specialists throughout healthcare and other community systems. And if you wanted to learn more, our website is located here. It is peersupportworks.org. Next slide then, Morgan. I also wanted to let everybody know that today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the N.A.P.S web for future viewing. As a participant in the webinar, if you're involved in the chat at all, your chat and name may be included in that recording. So I wanted to give that disclosure. And then we can go to the next slide for a few Zoom basics, which basically we're asking to please mute your device and do not show your cameras so that we can make sure people can hear Morgan and Leisha and all they have to say today. And here is the two icons that you can use to mute and to turn off your videos. They look like that picture on the slide. Next slide. And also, if you wanted to chat, I see many of you are already sharing where you're from, what you're hoping for in today's presentation. Feel free to utilize the chat. The icon there is what you can click on in order to access the chat feature. And then I have just one more slide to read from, and this is an acknowledgement disclosure. And this says the contents of this presentation were developed with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. The grant numbers are located there. NIDLR is a center with the Administration for Community Living, otherwise known as ACL, and ACL is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily represent the policy of NIDLR, ACL, or HHS, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government, as well as the opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of N.A.P.S. So with that being said, I'd love to turn it over to my friends and the presenters today, Morgan and Leisha.
Hi, everyone. So today, Morgan and I are going to be presenting on a study that we're currently conducting, a 3-year study of the career experiences of recently certified peer specialists. I'm Leisha Ostrow. I'm the principal investigator on this grant and the CEO of Live and Learn. Live and Learn is, I believe, the only US-based psychiatric survivor research organization. We do a lot of research on employment, self-employment, and peer support. Most of our funding comes from the federal government through grants and also through contracts and partnerships with other stakeholders like other researchers and community groups, social enterprises, things like that. I identify as a survivor researcher. I have a PhD in public health, and I have my own personal experiences in the mental health and disability systems. And I created Live and Learn because I felt that we needed a place to do lived experience research. And so I'll let Morgan introduce herself.
My name is Morgan. I'm happy to be here today. And just to give a little background of who I am, I went to college to get a degree in biology, switched to psychology, long story. But and then following graduating, I worked several years in direct service in different areas. But I did spend 2.5 years as a peer counselor at a peer respite here in California. And from there, well, with kind of all my direct service experience, I realized that direct service is not for me, mostly because I just reached a really high level of burnout and I was not loving my life the way I wanted to, but I still wanted to help. And I considered going back to school, and to do that, I needed research experience, which is how I connected with Leisha. And she so graciously offered me a job as a research assistant, and I worked my way up, and now I am now a research program manager for Live and Learn and a lead for the N.A.P.S study.
So I use a meditation app called 10% Happier, and they're giving away complimentary year-long memberships for mental health professionals this month in honor of May is Mental Health Month. Anyway, so I clicked on it out of curiosity, and I just, in preparation for this webinar, which is about the career choices of people who've been certified as a peer specialist, I thought it was just so interesting that they include certified peer specialists as a category of mental health professionals. And it just spoke to me to how far peer support has come. There's a lot of opinions, I think. Well, I'll talk a little bit about that, whether that's for the best or not. But yeah, I think it's just sort of evidence that the peer support is making its way into the world as a category of mental health professional. And also, if you're a CPS and you would like a free membership, then you should definitely go there and get one. So this is a 3-year study. As I said, we're now in the 2nd year. So today we're going to be presenting on the 1st year's data, which is from about March to October of 2020. Obviously, we were not aware that the pandemic would be happening, the day before we started data collection. But so we have some interesting data here from that time. So we recruited people who've been recently certified as a peer specialist. We started originally just wanting people who were certified in 2019 or 2020. But just given some of the complications with the states and grandparenting, we did open it up to people who are certified earlier, which I think has actually been a good thing because we have some comparisons from people who've been certified in the past couple of years versus last year. So the people who were eligible for this study had to be in one of the states that we were recruiting from. We have 4 states and 4 regions of the United States. The really unique thing about this study is that while everyone in the cohort is certified, not everyone is working in peer support. So we have some comparisons there between people who are working in peer support jobs versus working in other occupations, and then people who are not working at all right now. So we can look at different reasons, why people have made those choices or not made those choices, but are in that position, and different characteristics of different jobs. So we are looking primarily at the reasons that people got certified. A lot of the questions in the survey, some of you have probably taken it, I hope, ask about employment history. We ask about self-efficacy and financial well-being, and then characteristics of work, the work environment, so job satisfaction, burnout, things that might contribute to that in the work environment, and then other activities that people participate in, like parenting, education, volunteering, things like that.
Yeah, and as Leisha mentioned, we did launch this last year. So this is kind of just an overview. We are smack dab in the middle in follow-up survey year 2. But we did start last year in March from 2020 or in 2020 and went through October for our baseline survey. We then asked a few participants or a handful to participate in interviews. As I mentioned, we are in the middle of our second year of data collection now, and then we'll do interviews again in the fall. And then next year we will wrap up at least with our data collection, we will wrap up next year, again, March through October.
So our primary research questions were, what is the experience of work like after certification, and has that changed from before certification? So like I said, we asked for an employment history, and then we're asking people about their experiences going forward to see, our hypothesis was that people might be getting better jobs or moving up in their careers as a result of getting certified, or, deciding that they wanted to get more education or go into a different career. We're interested in whether the employment of people in this study is related to the local job market or context. So, we didn't predict the high levels of unemployment that would be happening in 2020, but we're really interested in digging into whether people who are certified as a peer specialist are more adversely affected by the local job market. And then looking at how certification might have changed peer specialists' social, emotional, and financial situation.
So as Leisha mentioned, we recruited from 4 states. We chose these states based on geographic diversity. We wanted to kind of cover as much of the different regions of the United States as we could. Also, we made selections based on the number of people who were getting certified in those states, because we wanted a large group to choose from, and then also the willingness of the state to share participant information or CPS information. And so you can see here we recruited from Oregon, Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. You can see the numbers associated with them. Our smallest group is from Oregon with 71 people, and our largest is Pennsylvania with 265.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we asked the states to send us the name and contact information of everyone who was certified in 2019 or 2020. So that was partially how we chose the states, was whether they were able to send that information. In Oregon, they actually have a public database. So we combed through that to find people from 2019 and 2020, and then recruited everyone that we could. So, okay. So as many of you know, peer support has a long history. I always like to say that it's just something that naturally occurs between equals in any setting. Speaking from personal experience, anytime that I was in a hospital or a treatment program, those relationships, supportive relationships, or, self-advocacy relationships in many cases develop sometimes without the institutional endorsement. So Darby Penny in 2018, she's one of the original people that worked on making peer support a job category in New York, defined peer support as a process through which people who share common experiences or face similar challenges come together as equals to give and receive help based on the knowledge that comes through shared experience. So now, many years later, we have a certification process in 46 states. It's coming soon to California, finally. And the latest estimates is that there are over 25,000 certified peer specialists in the United States. I think SAMHSA recently released some estimates that they are planning for peer specialists to make up about 25% of the behavioral health workforce in the next several years. There's been a lot of talk about the shortages of behavioral health practitioners in many systems, especially, in the past year. I think that's really come to a head. And so, I think there's a lot of pros and cons of professionalization. I think peer support really contributes something unique to the services that are provided in any system, based on those shared experiences, mutuality, reciprocal relationships. But, I think that the concerns that professionalizing peer specialists might threaten this foundation are legitimate in some ways. It's, I think, difficult to protest a system that you're also a part of, but, I think there's also a lot of changes that can be made from within the system, but maintaining that kind of angle towards social justice and advocacy and mutuality, I think it's a struggle, as many of you know, for a lot of peer specialists. But, so I don't think that the argument is settled yet as to whether it's a pro or con. In terms of my interests, I started out doing research on peer support and peer-run organizations, and have moved over into employment research. I would say employment has made a big difference in my life, in my recovery, if I can say. So I also think that employment has been a detractor from my mental health in a lot of ways. Like in this study, we're talking about burnout and job satisfaction, things like that. So I'm really interested in worker rights, how we can ensure that that all workers, but especially peer specialists, are being treated equitably, getting fair pay and having decent work environments. And I think that professionalization is kind of a requirement towards advocating for some of those issues. To be entitled to worker rights, you have to be a worker and not just a volunteer. So this is a quote from one of our participants in an interview. We just thought it was, speaks to some of the issues. So this person said, "These mills that are turning out peer support specialists, and then you have an industry that's not hiring. And now it's become one more mechanism for a third party to come in and start making a profit." So, I think this is, many of you have probably had the experience of getting certified, going through the training, going through the certification process. Sometimes it's a lot of paperwork. Obviously, the training is a lot of work for people. And then there not being any jobs available, or there are jobs available, but they have requirements that you can't meet despite having the certification, like having a car or having a certain amount of time in recovery or things like that, that don't seem to really get at the point of peer support. And then I think there's sort of this industry perspective. What I noticed when we were trying to recruit states was that a lot of the partners and stakeholders that I know who really have invested from the ground up in building peer support were like no longer powerful players in the field. It kind of been outsourced to certification bodies that may have not only nothing to do with peer support or no knowledge of the history of peer support, but not even really invested in the behavioral health system. So, I think just watching for those institutional influences and, profit-making motives, I would like to see people have good jobs as professionals, and also, have an ownership stake and not lose power that way.
So Laisha mentioned some of the things that lead to certification, but I just want to go over it for anybody that might not be familiar with it. So first of all, Live and Learn worked with Doors to Wellbeing under the Copeland Center to update their peer specialist database. If you guys have not checked it out, I really recommend it. It's very interesting. I'm not just saying that because I helped populate it, but they break down requirements and good contacts for each state. So it's helpful for people who want to get certified and want to know how to, for other states to kind of check in and see what other states are doing and how they're doing it. But from that, we did it around the same time that we were recruiting for our study. So it kind of helped add some context of what people were going through or had to go through. So just typical state requirements, and again, these can change state by state, but the most common ones are that most states require individuals to be 18 years or older to become certified. Most states do have an education requirement of high school level or equivalent. Lived experience of some sort. This again does change state by state. Some states separate mental health and substance use disorders. Some states even have peer specialists that are family members. that, have lived experience of having a family member with mental health struggles. And so some kind of lived experience. Alicia mentioned this time in recovery, which in my opinion could be debatable, but most of them say that you should be in recovery or not having extreme states within the last year. And then some do require a background check. And then the typical process, again, it varies, but usually there's some kind of application and then a training. Most trainings are most trainings are about 40 hours a week or 40 hours. Some do have longer trainings. Some states, they have their own, or some states have many approved trainings that you can go to as long as you just meet one of those. Then there's tests often that are either as part of the training or just part of becoming certified. Some states do require that you have hours of work experience before the final level of certification. Then you get certified, and then a follow-up is you have to do continuing education, which is CEUs, and recertification. And I believe most certifications are about 2 years in length. And then again, as Leisha mentioned, there was a grandparenting process, which basically what that means is that there were some states that kind of revamped their certification requirements or made it an official process. And so the people that were working in peer support or had a previous certification were able to still be included in these changes. And that kind of affected us, because as we were going and recruiting for people who were certified in 2019 and 2020, some of those states had completed their grandparenting process in that time. So we had all these people who had been certified for about 10 years that were newly certified. But as Leisha said, it has opened doors to comparison in unique ways. So kind of getting into the data that we collected last year, we did want to ask participants why they wanted to get certified and the reasons for working in peer support. And I won't go through all of these here just to save time, but the most important or the most common reason for working in peer support, 34% of our participants said that they wanted to make meaning of their own suffering or trauma while reducing the suffering of others. We also see themes of being valued for your lived experience and what a peer actually is, and then also just giving back to support others. And then for the reasons for becoming certified, the top reason was 30% of people saying they wanted, or someone had encouraged them to get certified. We also see reasons, stepping stone to other opportunities. Certification was required by 20% of people's employers, and just having a professional title to your name. And then to add some context to these motivations and kind of what the experience is like to get certified, we pulled a couple quotes. This one says, "It was the best way to turn what had been a barrier into a stepping stone, enabling me to use my lived experience to help others." Another one says, I apologize, I have to move my window here. Anyway, to actually have a chance of getting a job in a field to help other people out and be taken more professionally, more seriously. So again, kind of, highlighting these, why people wanted to get certified. And this is a quote just talking a little bit about some of the barriers that we were aware, or we were informed of. So if you qualify for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, they pay for the 2-week training at the state level. I didn't qualify, so I paid $1,100 out of pocket to take a 2-week class so that I could take the certification test. So this both shows that there are facilitators to getting certified if you qualify, and then but it can also be barriers for some people. So our study sample, we had 681 participants in total that filled out the survey last year and that we've re-invited this year. Of that, we had some missing information of employment history or people that had no employment history, but we ended up with 152 people that were not currently working and 439 that were currently working. When we broke it down a little bit further, we were interested in what kind of jobs are they working? So we did see that 116 people were not working in CPS jobs. This could be anything that is that did not require certification. And then I'm going to jump over, we had the 291 that were working in CPS jobs. That means that the job required certification. And then we had this like other group, which was people who said they were working a CPS job, but it either only required the training or it didn't require certification. Something that is great about research is that you learn to improve your survey from year to year. And so this year we wanted to ask those people, if you're working a CPS job that didn't require certification, you know, just asking if they could explain a little bit more about the job, and so that we can have context instead of just saying we have this other group. So just again, breaking down a little bit of who these people are. We had 65% of our sample was female. And then the age range was 21 to 83, so a wide group there. And then the average age was 46 and a half years, so 46 or 47 years of age. And then race, we had 67.2% white, 26% African American. We did have some other races as well in smaller quantity. And then our ethnicity, we did see that we had 10% of our population did identify as Latinx. And then we were also just curious about education. And again, you know, reminding that the certification in most states does require high school. So we didn't see anything below that. So that makes sense for our sample. But we did have the plurality of our sample did have some college or more. We see that, that some college, which means they didn't quite reach a degree, was 39%. But we even had 22% with bachelor's degree and even 9% with some kind of professional or graduate school. And then we also were curious about if people were receiving public benefits. The most common benefits that we observed were 20% of our participants received public assistance, 16% received SSDI, and then you can see veteran benefits and unemployment as well. So kind of getting into this work, these, you know, what kind of work are these people doing in our sample, and so this is complicated because we had 681 people, but people could report work for the past 12 months, and we had 819 jobs total reported. Again, breaking down these categories, we had about half in CPS related and half in non-CPS jobs, and then again, with that little further breakdown of the majority of the CPS jobs did require certification, and then just those few that didn't. And again, we hope to have answers about that this following year. So of our 681 participants, 586 were reported holding at least one job in the past 12 months. 38% reported 2 or more. That could have been 2 at the same time, or they left one job for another one. And then at the time of the survey, we had 439 currently employed, and 74% of those who were currently employed were in a peer specialist position of some sort. And then we were interested in looking, are there differences between the types of jobs? So the peer specialist jobs and the non-peer specialist jobs. And while this wasn't statistically significant, we did just want to show that for the majority of peer specialist jobs, they did offer paid time off and health insurance compared to non-peer specialist jobs. And then we also were curious about negative work experiences. And so some of the ones that we asked about that were more commonly seen were hearing offensive comments about people with lived experience. 52% of our participants had this kind of experience at work. Getting paid less than others in a similar job as you was 51%. 45% reported both negative attitudes towards them on part of the coworkers or did not receive enough education or training to do their job. 44% said there was negative attitudes toward them on the part of the supervisor, excuse me. There was lack of job counseling for 43%, and there was the fear of losing government benefits for 37%. So again, so we asked it in a way that we wanted to know did you experience this in non-peer support, peer support, or both? So this is both jobs, non-peer support jobs, and then peer support jobs. And what we can basically see from this is that, the highest numbers for all of them or most of them are the non-peer support and peer support jobs. So there isn't really a difference in these negative work experiences within the two different types of employment. Don't really know what to say about that. I would hope that peer support jobs would have less of some of the other kind, but this is what we noticed.
Okay, so we're starting work on doing some more complex statistical models where we can look at what predicts employment status and financial status. So these, I'm just gonna say that these results are very preliminary and they might change. We're definitely interested in getting people's opinions on the kind of things that we should include in our models and also interpreting the things that we found. Like I said, we looked at employment, employment status and financial status and their relationship to these different individual characteristics, demographics, benefits, work history, when they were certified, the services that they've used, disclosure to colleagues, and whether they live in a rural or urban area. Going forward, you'll notice this is very focused on kind of individual characteristics. We are looking at models that look more at the work environment and how that affects employment and financial status. So in terms of whether people were employed or non-employed when they completed the survey, people who were on SSDI or SSI or were a veteran or had used mental health services in the past 12 months or never disclosed to their colleagues at work were less likely to be employed in any job. And people who had been certified for a longer time were more likely to be employed. So, I think one of the implications here is that it takes some time after certification to get into a job. We don't know the extent to which that's confounded by the pandemic, since a lot of people finish their certification and then would have gone out into the workforce and had barriers related to the pandemic, either jobs not being available or not available in a way that that they could work at them. It's very common in employment research on people with psychiatric histories to see that people who are on SSDI and SSI are less likely to be employed. I think some of the more concerning things are that people who had used mental health services in the past 12 months were less likely to be employed, and people who didn't disclose. But again, we don't have full interpretations yet of these models, but we're definitely interested in why you think some of these things, we would see some of these things. And then in terms of whether people were working in a peer support job or another job, and the correlation with race, the statistically significant difference that we saw was that participants who were Black were less likely to be in a peer job than a non-peer job. And again, this is something we're very interested in exploring further, whether this is a disparity by race, why we would see Black people less likely to be in a peer job. As Morgan said, we're kind of digging more into why people are in peer jobs or not, whether that's a choice that they're willingly making, that they wanted to be in a different job, or whether there's some kind of discrimination in those jobs, in hiring for those jobs or tenure in them. But we didn't see a difference in the other groups. And then we really debated about whether to even ask diagnosis. We had an advisory council of 5 people who work in peer support, and they recommended that we ask diagnosis. So we went ahead with it. I have a lot of my own personal reservations about it. It's not something I normally ask in research studies, but since we have the data, we looked at it, and we found that for people who had been labeled with either schizophrenia or depression, they were more likely to be working in peer support. So again, we don't know exactly why that is. We are definitely open to input and what you guys think, if that's something that you see for yourself, or in the work environment, whether, organizations are more interested in hiring people who've had these experiences with these diagnoses, or whether it means that people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or depression are in some way excluded from other jobs. So again, certification year. So people who were certified in 2018 or earlier were more likely to be working in a peer job. Again, speaking to this situation where if you have a little bit more time since your certification and maybe have had other work experiences, you're more likely to be hired into a peer job. And then people who worked, we asked people how many months they'd worked out of the past 5 years, and people who had worked all of the 60 months. So 5 years is, 5 times 12 is 60 months. So people who had worked all of those 5 years were also more likely to be working in a peer support job. So we asked participants their wage and how much they worked, and then looked at weekly earnings as a function of the hours multiplied by the hourly wage to get weekly earnings. So people who were on SSDI or SSI made less on average per week than other participants. And that was as a result of the hours they worked, not because that they're paid less. And that, makes sense. I was on SSDI for a number of years and had to limit my work hours so that I didn't lose my benefits. And then people who reported a substance use diagnosis actually made more per week. But that was because they were working more hours. For veterans, they also made substantially more per week because they were paid more, not because they worked more hours. And it's my understanding that the VA can be difficult to get a job there, but once you get a job there, you're paid more than other peer support positions. And then for people who had worked more months out of the past 5 years, they also made a little bit more per week. These are all statistically significant. And that's because they both were paid more and worked more hours after having worked for the past 5 years. We used a scale from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that looks at financial well-being, and this is a scale used, nationally. It can be used with any groups, and they've done nationwide surveys. And we'll be in the future comparing those scores to the scores in our sample. So they define financial well-being as a state where a person can fully meet current and ongoing financial obligations, can feel secure in their financial future, and is able to make choices that allow them to enjoy life. So you can see kind of the examples of some of the questions. So I just wanted to note that this is a scale that looks at your feelings towards your financial situation, not your actual wages. So people who reported a schizophrenia diagnosis, they had less financial well-being. People who were older had greater financial well-being. People who were veterans had greater financial well-being. People who reported better physical health had also felt better about their financial situation, and people who felt better about their life in general also felt better about their financial situation. I've been kind of looking at the comments a little bit. I know there's been a lot of comments about the wages of peer specialists. We will be reporting that in the future, but I think this is another way of looking at that because the dollar isn't necessarily an absolute amount. I think for everyone, people have different situations and feelings towards money. So this is kind of another way of looking at whether the wages that people are getting are feel adequate to them.
So through all this, we've also looked at job satisfaction, and we did find that CPS jobs just tended to have higher job satisfaction when compared to non-CPS jobs, which is really interesting finding, as we're looking at all these other factors of wage and everything like that. But yeah, they do have higher job satisfaction. And then just a couple more quotes to add context to, some of the things that people have been saying in our survey and in our interviews. I consider myself very fortunate. This is a dream job. Hands-on peer work with my clients. Nothing beats it. Another one is, I love my job. I love my people. I'm very busy all the time, but it's kind of like my getaway from life. This has always been my passion to come in and stand alongside someone. And then the last one is, it allowed me, a person thriving in recovery but lacking in formal education, to have a job that wasn't in a restaurant while still being of service. So just again, this idea that people who are getting certified and are working in peer support, the reasons they're doing it is because they want to give back and help, and that might be contributing to the reason why it's high satisfaction. But on the flip side, we do have qualitative data, but our qualitative data is through interviews, but we also have a lot of text responses in the survey. We have open-ended questions. So I just want to be very cautious when we're like, oh yeah, CPS jobs, you have great job satisfaction. This isn't the reality for everybody, and we understand that. And so just to kind of highlight these, this is, preliminary results, as Laisha said. We don't really know the nitty-gritty details of the relationships yet, but not everyone has had a positive experience following certification. And we've heard from these different areas that participants are they shared having barriers in securing a position as a CPS, feeling prepared for the type of work that they're going to be doing, whether that's because they weren't prepared from the training, or their job just expects different things from them, or being taken seriously and having their role respected. So again, some more context to add to this. I still can't get a job after the training because of my background, but yet that's what got me the certification, is my background. I would have been in the car like 5 to 6 hours a shift. So I was like, okay, they're hiring me to be a taxi driver instead of doing things that are actually beneficial to people. So again, that kind of, feeling prepared for the type of work and role confusion. And then the final one says, she, and referring to her boss, supervised people before, but I felt like she needed more training on how to supervise a peer. And we all lacked the ability to kind of communicate with each other.
So I think a big qualifier on all of what we've presented here is that, the people who ended up in the study might be biased in some ways simply because of the requirements for certification. So they don't represent necessarily all people with psychiatric history. So, for one, as we said, in all of the states, you have to have at least a high school diploma or equivalent. So we don't see people who have less education than that. And then people are also sometimes excluded from certification and training if they've been hospitalized in the past year. So we don't see a lot of that in our sample. But we do see that the length of certification and disclosure to colleagues improves employment status. So again, if you have been certified earlier, you're more likely to be employed. That the certification length and certain diagnoses are related to having a peer support position. So, we show that data on schizophrenia and depression diagnoses, with the caveat that not everyone who gets certified wants to have a peer support role. Sometimes people do it for other reasons, either something personal for them or just to get a little bit more education and then go into something else. And then people who have a more robust work history are more likely to work in peer support. So again, there's a lot of different reasons that people end up in a peer job versus a not peer job. Veterans and people with a positive outlook on their health and life overall had higher financial well-being, which also increased with age. And we'll be getting more into that data. I would say that the results we've looked at so far don't indicate that the amount of money people make is necessarily related to their financial well-being, surprisingly.
And the next steps for what this project will be doing, we're going to finish data collection for the second survey. Like I said, we're in the middle of it right now. It's quite the process, but we are excited to see, what kind of changes, because that's why we're doing this longitudinal study, is we want to see, are there changes year to year? And again, we don't know what the implications of COVID's going to have on it, but it will be interesting to see, hopefully a little bit post-COVID world that we, people are able to get back into the workforce if they want to. And then we will have another wave, which is actually going to be a health and function wave. And that's going to be done by the UIC Center of Mental Health Services Research and Policy. And that's will be taking place around the same time that we're doing our second interviews.
Yeah, can I
I'll
just
add
more about that? Oh, yeah. So that we'll be recruiting from our same sample, and Live and Learn will be the one contacting people. And this survey will ask, instead of asking questions about only employment, we'll be asking questions about your personal health and things like that. So we hope that if you're recruited for that wave that you'll participate, but participating in that wave isn't required to participate in our final survey.
Exactly. So yeah, that'll be around the same time that we're doing our second year interviews. And then we will be in the third and final year of data collection, which will be very exciting. Again, that follow-up a year later is to help see what are these changes over time and how is everyone doing 3 years into 3 years into this. So, and of course we are going to continue our analysis, and we really, as Laisha said, we encourage your thoughts and perspectives, because there's only so much that we can look at, and when you're working close to it, sometimes you miss some things. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts and everything. And then I think we're going to open it up to questions, but I did want to just say that if you're interested in more of the findings that we're reporting here, we do have a website, peerspecialist.net, which has updates about the study and, like I said, the results. You can also follow Live and Learn on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then if you have any specific questions about the CPS study, you can email the email there, or if you have something more general for Live and Learn, we have that contact email as well. And then just a quote that I was delighted to hear in an interview, just because I don't always have the best language myself, but we had a participant who he warned us that he might use some curse words, and he said, "I don't know how we can talk about community mental health in the United States without having a couple explicitives." So we wanted to kind of end on that note of yeah, we're completely
Well, thank you so much, Morgan and Laisha. This has truly been incredible, and it's an honor to hear your research. I've read about it before, but to hear it straight from your words is a whole nother level of me being able to retain that. And I think speaks volumes to, in the sample of the research that you were able to do, really the career trajectories that have occurred. Specifically to me, some of the things that have really stood out was the pay of peers, and how so many peers are doing this and still living in poverty or working multiple jobs. And I myself have been a person working multiple jobs while providing peer support. So I firsthand know that struggle. But then to speak of the job satisfaction that doesn't exist for all, but exists for many, I think really speaks to the passion behind this profession, and the satisfaction that comes from that. Also, just, I wanted to mention the disparities that exist, and you highlighted a little bit of that. And I'm really looking forward to the next round of research, the next round of being able to share this with the national peer community, because you guys are doing some really awesome work. So I want to say thank you to both of you. We do have some time for questions, about 7 minutes that we can take some questions. I do want to let everybody know that we are offering a special members only Q&A session after this. So if you're a member and you're planning on attending that session, I am going to ask you to hold your questions so that others can ask questions now. There will be that half hour following this that you've been provided a link to for a members only Q&A. But if you have any questions for Laisha or Morgan, please feel free to type those into the chat box, and we'll make sure that some of those can get answered now. In the meantime, while we're waiting for some of those to come in, one question I had was, as you go into the next steps, the next round of research, will you be surveying and questioning other states, or will it be those same 4 that were part of this survey?
Yeah, well, so it's not just the same states, but the same group of people. So those 681 people who completed the first survey, those will be the same people we recruit, so that we can see individual changes over time. So whether, someone had a certain work history before they got certified, and then what did their career choices look like after that?
Thanks, Leisha. That definitely helps me as not a person that's familiar with research. Leaving it to you guys. Thank you very much.
And Amy, just to make a comment on, you're saying some of these disparities or why are people not working in the field? We actually added a question that I'm actually really excited to see the response to this year. For people not working or even working in peer specialist jobs, we were curious of why they might not be working or what might have delayed them in working. And so we were asking about, job availability. And also we have the option of they learned that it just wasn't for them, which, like me, I learned that it was not for me. So I'm really interested to hear or to see that data this year.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. Thanks, Morgan. I'm not seeing very many questions come in, but I'll say, I guess, another thing while it's on my mind that's coming up for me throughout this. And, speaking of the pay of peer specialists and really not making nearly enough as some of the others in the same office setting, when sometimes the impact of our work is much stronger than some of the others. It really speaks to me on how much advocacy needs to happen for higher pay of peers, especially when you share numbers of SAMHSA, our federal government, encouraging the entire workforce to be 25% peer specialists. That can only happen if our pay is raised and we're actually able to do this and make a living wage. As you guys are sharing, I was reading some comments coming in the chat box of people saying that they're planning to leave the field of peer support because of not making the wage that we're able to. And it's really a
She's frozen.
Really so.
I don't want to cut her off. I was going to comment.
problem all across the
We didn't get the last part of your comment, Amy.
I was just saying advocacy for higher pay for peer specialists is of prime importance.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, we have an economic system in which people are not necessarily paid for the value that their work contributes to society. I mean, it's a much larger problem than peer support. I think peer support is interesting because, like you said, you can be sitting next to someone in the same building, and still have these huge disparities in pay. I mean, I don't know the average pay for a psychiatrist or a social worker. I mean, but there's a hierarchy there that, yeah, I mean, you're not paid for outcomes really, despite all the talk of kind of pay for performance and all of that. That's really like applies to hospital systems and not to individual workers. And it happens in a lot of different fields, look at the people who were going to work during the pandemic and what they get paid compared to a lot of people who are staying home on their computers. What our society can't function without those people. They don't get paid for it. So I think, as with a lot of things in the pandemic, it highlighted hopefully issues that we can address as a civilization, and peer support is included in that. And again, I think that's one of the benefits of professionalization, being on that list, of professions, I think kind of is an opportunity to say like, hey, these are real workers who are doing real work and deserve to be paid for it, and not just in, free meditation app subscriptions.
Exactly. And I'd say that in my communications with our participants and everything, it's become very clear too that there's some disparities in companies understanding what peer supporters do. So, while it's important that people get trained and get out there in the workforce, it's also important that the employers that are offering the jobs understand and respect the role that a peer supporter is, and not just giving them all this work that doesn't have anything to do with what they're certified in, which we've heard a lot of, unfortunately.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll be getting more into that data about the work environment and how that affects satisfaction, burnout, feelings about your life and about your work, and see if there's some recommendations that we, specific recommendations that we can make about the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Leisha. Thank you, Morgan. There's a couple other comments coming in here. I'm not sure if they're questions that you want to address now, or if they're questions that, kind of are even in the realm of this study. but about, developing peer support advocacy associations or groups statewide, if you have any experience around that. And then also, how having SSI or SSDI and how that affects income and wages and the difference between states, if you have plans for the next steps of research around any of those types of things.
Yeah, the states thing is the easiest to answer. So when we made agreements with the states to get names and contact information from them, I told them that we would not be reporting by state, that we weren't looking to kind of out any particular states as doing one thing or another. And so it hasn't been something that we've been specifically looking at in analysis. So, I mean, if we find something, I'm willing to kind of go back to the states and see if they would be interested in looking at those results specifically. And then the question about SSDI and SSI, I'm looking at it, whether wages change. Yeah, so when we looked at weekly earnings, there were lower weekly earnings for people on SSDI and SSI on average because they worked fewer hours. So it's my understanding is a little bit rusty at this moment, but that depending on whether you're on SSDI or SSI, your hours might be affected or the amount that you're allowed to earn, but that can all affect. It's coming from like the participant side, like not that the employer is discriminating against people on SSDI or SSI necessarily, but that because they need to maintain their benefits, are working less. And again, we're all in this system where if you're on SSDI or SSI, that's where you're getting your health insurance, or you get it from an employer, and there's no guarantees about whether your employer is going to provide insurance or whether you're going to be able to keep your job. And so, I definitely am personally sympathetic to the risks of getting off of benefits by working too many hours. So that's, a whole other system that obviously needs a lot of work.
Thanks, Leisha. Well, we are nearing the end of our time, so I want to give both of you a round of applause on an amazing presentation today. Thank you for your research and your commitment to this field of peer support.